At the office party, my boss announced, Sophia will handle the coffee since she's not qualified for real work. Everyone laughed. I served coffee with a smile. Monday morning, he walked into a meeting and saw someone he never expected. I was arranging the dessert table when I heard my name cut through the cocktail party chatter. Everyone turned to look at me, and for a split second I thought maybe, finally, someone was going to recognize the proposal I'd submitted last month or the client presentation I'd quietly perfected over the weekend. Ashley will handle the coffee since she's not qualified for real work, Christopher declared, raising his glass higher. The room exploded with laughter. Not polite chuckles. Real, hearty laughter that echoed off the conference room walls. I felt my face flush hot, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of being overlooked had taught me to swallow reactions. I walked toward the coffee station, my heels clicking against the polished floor in rhythm with their dying laughter. Each step felt heavier than the last. "That's our Ashley," someone called out from the crowd. "Always ready to serve." More giggles rippled through the room. I reached for the coffee pot, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was serving coffee to people who had no idea I'd been the one who'd restructured the entire filing system last year. The same system that had saved the company thousands in audit fees. Christopher continued his speech, something about team achievements and quarterly goals. I tuned him out, focusing instead on the familiar routine of filling cups. Dark roast for the executives. Decaf for the nervous types. Sugar packets arranged in perfect rows. "Make sure you get everyone, Ashley," Christopher added with a wink. "We wouldn't want anyone to go without service." The word service hung in the air like a challenge. I smiled and nodded, moving from table to table with practiced efficiency. But inside something was shifting. Every laugh had carved a little deeper. Every smirk had peeled back another layer of patience I'd been hoarding for 3 years. Mrs. Patterson from accounting patted my arm sympathetically as I poured her coffee. "Don't let them get to you, honey," she whispered. "You know your worth." But did I? Standing there in my discount blazer serving coffee to people who made twice my salary, I wasn't sure anymore. When had I become the office mascot? When had my contributions become so invisible that my only recognized skill was knowing how everyone liked their coffee? The party continued around me. Conversations about weekend plans, vacation homes and stock options. I moved through it all like a ghost, refilling cups and clearing plates. Invisible but essential. Noticed but not valued. "Ashley's got this handled," I heard someone say. "She's good at the simple stuff." Simple stuff. 3 years of staying late, catching other people's mistakes and quietly fixing problems before they became crises. All reduced to simple stuff. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone in the break room, washing the coffee carafes. The laughter from the conference room had faded to distant murmurs. I scrubbed each pot methodically, the hot water turning my hands red. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my college roommate Sarah. "How was the work party? Any drama?" I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could I explain that the drama was me? That I'd become the punchline to a joke I didn't even understand? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I dried my hands on the rough paper towels. The building was getting quiet now. Security would be making their rounds soon, and I'd walk to my car in the parking garage like I did every night. Go home to my studio apartment, heat up leftover takeout and pretend that tomorrow would be different. But tonight felt different. Tonight something had cracked open inside me that I'd been keeping sealed for too long. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Dominic Martinez. Uncle Dom. The man who'd built this company from nothing, who'd handed it over to younger management so he could retire to his ranch in Montana. The man who'd hugged me at my college graduation and told me I could change the world. My finger hovered over his name. We'd exchanged Christmas cards and birthday texts, but I'd never told him I worked here. Never mentioned that his precious company had become my daily humiliation. He'd warned me about taking the job under my mother's maiden name, said it might cause complications later. Later had arrived. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Ashley? Everything okay, kiddo?" Those 2 words, kiddo, transported me back to summer barbecues and bedtime stories. Back to when someone believed I was capable of more than serving coffee to people who thought I was disposable. "Uncle Dom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to tell you something about where I work. You work at my company? Uncle Dom's voice carried a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. Ashley, why didn't you tell me? I pressed my back against the break room wall, suddenly exhausted. I applied using Mom's maiden name. Ashley Collins instead of Ashley Martinez. I wanted to earn my place, not have it handed to me because of family connections. The silence stretched between us across the phone line. I could hear him processing this information, probably remembering our conversation 3 years ago when I'd graduated with my business degree. He'd offered me a position then and I'd politely declined, insisting I wanted to make my own way. I remember you mentioning that plan, he said slowly. But kiddo, you never told me which company you chose. I didn't want you to worry. Or interfere. I needed to know I could succeed on my own merit. The words sounded hollow now after tonight's humiliation. And how's that working out for you? I laughed bitterly. I've become the office coffee girl. Literally. That's what they call me behind my back. I've heard them. The first time someone had referred to me as the coffee girl, I'd been standing outside the supply closet, overhearing Janet from marketing explain to a new intern where to find me. Just look for the coffee girl, she'd said. Ashley's always willing to help with the basic stuff. That was 2 years ago. Since then the title had stuck. New employees were introduced to Ashley, our coffee girl, as if serving beverages was my official job description. My actual title, Administrative Coordinator, had somehow vanished from common usage. Tell me everything, Uncle Dom said quietly. Start from the beginning. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. It started small. My first week, Christopher asked me to handle the coffee for a client meeting. I thought it was temporary. Then it became my responsibility for all meetings. Then office parties. Then daily coffee runs. And your other duties? I still do them. I process invoices, manage schedules, coordinate between departments. But somehow that's not what people remember about me. They remember that I know how everyone likes their coffee. That I restock the break room. That I'm the one who stays late to clean up after meetings. I told him about the proposal I drafted for the Henderson account. 3 weeks of research, market analysis and strategic recommendations. Christopher had submitted it under his name, presenting it to the board like it was his brainchild. When it secured a $50,000 contract, he'd gotten the credit and a bonus. Did you say anything? Uncle Dom asked. What was I supposed to say? I'm the coffee girl. Nobody expects strategic thinking from me. There was the time I'd trained Marcus, a fresh college graduate with half my experience. Within 6 months he'd been promoted to assistant manager. When I'd asked Christopher about advancement opportunities, he'd patted my shoulder and said, "Let's focus on what you're good at, Ashley." I have documentation, I continued. Emails where I've suggested process improvements that were later implemented without credit. Performance reviews where my contributions were minimized. Meeting notes where my ideas were attributed to other people. Why didn't you fight back? I closed my eyes, remembering the conference room meeting where I'd finally worked up the courage to speak up. I'd presented an idea for streamlining our client onboarding process. Christopher had nodded politely, then moved on to the next agenda item. 2 weeks later he'd announced the new revolutionary onboarding system. My exact proposal refined and presented as his innovation. I tried once. I suggested we needed better project management software. Christopher dismissed it in front of the whole team, said we should focus on realistic improvements instead of expensive pipe dreams. 3 months later he rolled out new project management software and took credit for the initiative. That's when you should have called me. I kept thinking it would get better. That eventually my work would speak for itself. That someone would notice. I laughed without humor. Tonight they noticed. They noticed I'm good at serving coffee. Uncle Dom was quiet for a long moment. I'm coming to see you. What? No, you don't need to. I'm already booking a flight. I'll be there Saturday morning. We're going to fix this. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly. I met Uncle Dom at his hotel downtown, my stomach churning with nerves. He looked older than I remembered, his hair more silver, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had built a company from nothing. Show me everything, he said without preamble. I'd brought my laptop, 3 years' worth of printed emails and a folder thick with documentation. We spread it across the hotel room desk like evidence for a court case. In a way it was. This proposal, he said, holding up the Henderson account file. This is graduate-level strategic analysis. And he presented it as his own work. I have the original draft with timestamps. And the email where he asked me to research some background information on the client. I pulled up the document on my laptop. He never asked me to write a full proposal. I did it because I thought it would help the team. Uncle Dom studied the screen, his expression growing darker. What about your performance reviews? I handed him the stack of evaluations. 3 years of meets expectations ratings. No mention of the Henderson proposal, the filing system overhaul, or the client retention strategy one developed. Client retention strategy? We were losing repeat customers. I analyzed the data, identified patterns, and created a follow-up protocol. Customer retention improved by 30% over 6 months. Christopher presented it to the board as his initiative. Uncle Dom set down the papers and looked at me directly. Ashley, you've been running strategic operations for a company that doesn't even know you exist. This isn't just unfair, it's criminal. I should have said something sooner. No, he said firmly. You shouldn't have had to. A good manager recognizes talent. A good company promotes based on merit. This is a failure of leadership, not a failure of yours. He reached for his phone. I'm making some calls. It's time they remembered who built this company. And it's time they learned who you really are. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that makes your coffee taste bitter and your clothes feel wrong. I'd been awake since 5, checking my phone every few minutes for the email Uncle Dom promised would arrive. When it finally came at 7:30, the subject line made my heart race. Quarterly leadership strategy session required attendance. The email was formal, corporate, and sent from Dominic Martinez's official company address. Seeing his name in the sender field after all these years felt surreal. Below my name on the attendee list were all the usual suspects. Christopher, department heads, senior managers. People who'd never included me in anything more strategic than ordering lunch. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusting my blazer for the 3rd time. This wasn't my typical Monday uniform of comfortable flats and a cardigan. Today called for my interview suit, the one I'd worn when I'd first applied here 3 years ago. The one that made me feel capable and professional instead of invisible. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt endless. I'd only been up here twice before. Once during my initial interview and once to deliver documents Christopher had forgotten. The executive level smelled different. Expensive cologne and leather chairs instead of coffee grounds and copy machine toner. I reached the boardroom 5 minutes early, my heels clicking against the marble floor with more confidence than I felt. Through the glass walls I could see them already settling in. Christopher occupied the head chair like a king holding court, his designer tie perfectly knotted, his posture radiating the authority he'd claimed over the past 3 years. Margaret from HR sat to his right, flipping through a tablet. The marketing director, sales manager, and operations chief filled the other seats, their Monday morning energy still sluggish from weekend recovery. None of them looked up when I paused outside the door. That's when I saw Uncle Dom approaching from the opposite corridor, his stride purposeful and unhurried. He wore a navy suit I remembered from board meetings 15 years ago, back when I was still in high school and would occasionally visit the office during summer breaks. He carried a leather portfolio identical to the one tucked under my arm. "Ready?" he asked quietly as he reached me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Together we entered the boardroom. The conversation died instantly. Christopher's confident smile flickered like a candle in wind when he registered who was walking through the door. The marketing director dropped her pen. Someone's coffee cup clinked against the glass table. "Dominic," Christopher said, recovering quickly and rising from his chair. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't realize you were in town." "Sit down, Christopher." Uncle Dom's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We have business to discuss." Christopher hesitated, clearly uncertain about giving up his position at the head of the table. The room held its collective breath. Finally he lowered himself back into his chair, but his posture remained rigid. Uncle Dom moved to the front of the room, placing his portfolio on the presentation podium. I took a seat at the table, acutely aware of every pair of eyes tracking my movement. Margaret shot me a confused look. The sales manager frowned like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Good morning, everyone," Uncle Dom began, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'd like to introduce Ashley Martinez, your new internal ethics advisor. She'll be reporting directly to me, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a paperclip drop. Christopher's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic. The pieces were clearly clicking into place for him. Ashley Collins. Ashley Martinez. The connection he'd never bothered to make. Someone cleared their throat. Margaret shifted in her chair. The operations chief looked between Uncle Dom and me like he was watching a tennis match. "I'm sorry," Christopher said, his voice strained. "Did you say Martinez?" Uncle Dom's smile held no warmth. "Ashley is my niece. She's been working here for 3 years under her mother's maiden name. Collins." I watched Christopher's face drain of color as the implications hit him. Every dismissive comment, every overlooked contribution, every coffee joke suddenly took on new weight. The room felt like it was vibrating with unspoken tension. "Now," Uncle Dom continued, opening his portfolio, "Ashley will be conducting a comprehensive review of our internal practices, starting with performance evaluations and promotion procedures." I stood and placed my first document on the table. The performance review tampering report we'd compiled over the weekend. Names were redacted throughout except for mine. A stark reminder of how thoroughly my contributions had been erased from official records. Margaret leaned forward to read it, her expression growing serious. The marketing director glanced nervously at Christopher, who sat frozen in his chair. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much we knew, how deep this investigation would go. "This company was built on integrity," Uncle Dom said, his gaze fixed directly on Christopher. "On recognizing talent, rewarding hard work, and creating opportunities for growth. What I've discovered recently suggests we've drifted from those values." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Christopher's hands were flat on the table, his knuckles white. The confident, dismissive man who'd made coffee jokes 3 days ago had vanished, replaced by someone who suddenly understood his world was shifting beneath him. Uncle Dom gestured toward me. "Ashley will be reviewing all management performance files, starting today. She'll have full access to personnel records, evaluation processes, and promotion decisions. We're going to ensure this company returns to its founding principles." I finally spoke, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I'll be scheduling individual meetings with each department head this week. We need to address some concerning patterns that have emerged." Christopher's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Around the table, faces showed varying degrees of discomfort and concern. The power dynamic had shifted completely in the span of 10 minutes. The meeting that was supposed to discuss quarterly strategies had become something else entirely. A reckoning that was 3 years in the making. By Tuesday afternoon, my inbox had 3 new messages with subject lines that made my stomach tighten. Confidential question, "Can we talk privately?" and simply, "Thank you." Each email came from women I barely knew, junior staff members who'd watched Monday's boardroom scene unfold through the office grapevine. The first message was from Lisa, a graphic designer I'd exchanged pleasantries with in the break room. "I heard what happened in the meeting yesterday. I have something you need to see." Attached was a scanned copy of her performance review from last year, the original draft with handwritten notes in the margins, and the final version that had somehow downgraded her rating from exceeds expectations to meets expectations. The handwriting in the margins was Christopher's. The second email came from Rachel in data analysis. Her story was different but disturbingly familiar. She developed a new reporting template that streamlined monthly analytics. 2 weeks after submitting it, Christopher had announced the innovative new reporting system in an all-hands meeting, taking full credit for the efficiency improvements. But it was the third email that made my hands shake. Jenny, an intern from last summer, had attached a voice memo instead of typing her experience. Her nervous voice wavered through my laptop speakers as she described how Christopher had consistently assigned her coffee runs and lunch orders while giving substantive projects to male interns with identical qualifications. "I thought it was just bad luck," she whispered on the recording. "But after I heard what happened to you, I started connecting dots I didn't want to see." By Thursday, my secure folder contained 17 separate testimonies. Each story revealed another layer of systematic undermining that went far beyond casual sexism. Christopher had built an intricate system of professional sabotage, targeting women who showed initiative, intelligence, or independence. I spent my evenings creating a digital timeline, cross-referencing dates, performance reviews, and project assignments. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemicals, crystal clear and impossible to deny. Every woman who'd challenged Christopher's authority or outperformed his expectations had faced mysterious setbacks within months. Sarah from marketing had pitched a social media campaign that increased engagement by 40%. Her next review criticized her lack of strategic thinking. Monica in accounting had identified a billing error that saved the company $12,000. 6 months later, her position was restructured into a lower-paying role. The most devastating discovery came when I requested 5 years of employment records from HR. Margaret initially resisted, citing privacy policies and proper procedures. When Uncle Dom walked into her office personally to override her objections, her face went pale. "Of course, Mr. Martinez," she stammered, pulling files from a locked cabinet. "I'll have everything ready within the hour." The numbers told a story more damning than individual testimonies. In the 2 years before Christopher's arrival, women comprised 43% of promoted employees. After he took over, that number dropped to 11%. Turnover among female staff had increased by 67%, with most citing limited growth opportunities in their exit interviews. But the smoking gun was buried in the digital archives. Email chains I shouldn't have been able to access but somehow could, thanks to Uncle Dom's administrative override. Messages between Christopher and the previous HR director discussing team dynamics and cultural fit that made my skin crawl. "Some personalities just don't mesh with our fast-paced environment," Christopher had written about Elena, a project manager who'd consistently exceeded her targets. Perhaps she'd be happier somewhere that values different qualities. Elena had resigned 3 weeks later. Friday morning, Uncle Dom and I requested a closed-door meeting with Christopher. No witnesses this time, just the three of us in the small conference room where I'd suffered through countless dismissive conversations over the years. Christopher entered with forced confidence, straightening his tie and checking his phone like this was a routine discussion. He'd clearly convinced himself that Monday's announcement was temporary, a family favor that would blow over once Uncle Dom returned to retirement. "Dominic," he said, extending his hand, "I'm glad we can finally sit down and clear up any misunderstandings." Uncle Dom didn't shake his hand. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from us. "Sit down, Christopher. Ashley has some findings to share." I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. The timeline filled the display, names, dates, patterns, and statistics that painted an undeniable picture of systematic discrimination. Christopher's confident expression faltered as his eyes scanned the data. "This is 5 years of personnel decisions," I said quietly. "Your decisions. Every promotion denied, every project reassigned, every woman who mysteriously became not a good fit after challenging your authority." Wait a minute," Christopher interrupted, leaning forward aggressively. "You can't just take isolated incidents and 17 separate testimonies," I continued, my voice steady. "Cross-referenced with performance data, project outcomes, and exit interviews. This isn't isolated. It's systematic." I clicked to the next slide, showing the dramatic shift in promotion statistics. Christopher's face flushed red, but he tried to maintain his composure. "These are complex personnel decisions," he said. "You're taking everything out of context. Office politics, personality conflicts. These things happen in any workplace." "Office politics," Uncle Dom repeated slowly. "Is that what you call stealing credit from junior staff members? Downgrading performance reviews to justify lower salaries? Creating hostile work environments for women who outperform your expectations?" I pulled up Elena's email chain, rotating the laptop so Christopher could read his own words. His face went white as he recognized the digital trail he'd left behind. That was taken out of context," he stammered. "Elena had legitimate performance issues that. Elena exceeded her targets by 23%, I said, clicking to her actual performance data. "Before you decided she wasn't a cultural fit." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Christopher stared at the screen, his earlier bravado evaporating. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. Uncle Dom leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but final. Christopher, you're relieved of your current role, effective immediately. No dramatic outburst. No desperate pleading. Just a man suddenly understanding that his carefully constructed kingdom of manipulation had crumbled in less than a week. The justice was quiet, professional, and absolute. The company-wide email went out at exactly 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, timed perfectly to catch everyone before the weekend but late enough to prevent immediate gossip sessions. I watched from my temporary desk as phones buzzed across the office floor, followed by the subtle sounds of people reading, rereading, and quietly sharing screens. Leadership restructure underway. Ashley Martinez promoted to interim hiring director, effective Monday. My inbox exploded within minutes. Messages poured in faster than I could read them. Some genuinely excited, others cautiously congratulatory, and a few that felt suspiciously like damage control from people who suddenly remembered every coffee joke they'd ever made. Congratulations, Ashley. Well deserved. Came from Lisa in graphics, the same Lisa who'd sent me her tampered performance review just days earlier. Her enthusiasm felt real, born from solidarity rather than self-preservation. But then there was David from sales. Amazing news. I always knew you had management potential. I stared at his message, remembering how he'd laughed the loudest at Christopher's coffee comment just last week. His sudden confidence in my abilities felt hollow and calculated. Margaret from HR knocked on my cubicle wall around 4:30, her expression carefully neutral. Ashley, I wanted to congratulate you personally, she said, though her eyes darted nervously around the office. I'm sure you'll do wonderfully in your new role. I wondered if she remembered covering her mouth to hide her smile during Christopher's joke. I wondered if she'd already started calculating how to position herself favorably with the new power structure. Some relationships, I realized, would never recover from the truth they'd revealed about themselves. Monday morning brought a different kind of energy to the office. Christopher's corner office remained dark, his nameplate already removed from the door. The facilities team had worked over the weekend, and I found myself staring at the empty space where his authority had once seemed so permanent. By Tuesday, the whispers started about his reassignment. Regional office in a smaller city 3 hours away. Assistant-level position. Salary cut that matched his new responsibilities. Uncle Dom had been thorough in crafting consequences that fit the scope of damage Christopher had caused. The story emerged in pieces throughout the week. Christopher had initially tried to refuse the transfer, demanding to speak with the board, threatening legal action, invoking his years of service. Uncle Dom had listened patiently to every protest, then presented him with 2 manila folders, one containing the transfer paperwork, the other containing termination documents and a detailed summary of his ethical violations. Your choice, Uncle Dom had said simply. Christopher had chosen the transfer. I learned about his decision through a brief, clinical email announcement. No fanfare, no explanation, just a notice that Christopher would be transitioning to a regional role to pursue new opportunities for professional growth. Corporate speak for professional exile. The office reactions varied like a spectrum of workplace politics. Some of the senior staff, particularly the men who'd benefited from Christopher's leadership style, seemed genuinely shocked. They moved through the halls with the cautious energy of people suddenly uncertain about unspoken rules they'd taken for granted. But the women were different. Rachel from data analysis walked straighter, her shoulders back in a way I'd never noticed before. Jenny, the former intern who'd returned as a junior analyst, actually spoke up in meetings instead of taking notes silently. Lisa started wearing brighter colors as if she'd been granted permission to be visible. It's like someone turned the lights on, Monica from accounting told me during a chance encounter in the break room. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding my breath until I could finally exhale. The transformation wasn't dramatic or immediate, but it was unmistakable. Women started eating lunch in the main cafeteria instead of hiding at their desks. They lingered in conversations instead of rushing back to work. Small changes that spoke to a larger shift in the office atmosphere. Thursday afternoon, I made a decision that felt both petty and perfect. I stopped by the coffee shop across the street and ordered a custom thermal mug. The engraving was simple, direct, and borrowed from Christopher's own vocabulary, not qualified. I left it on his empty desk Friday morning, wrapped in tissue paper with no note. Let him figure out the message. His last day arrived with none of the ceremony that usually accompanied executive departures. No cake in the break room, no farewell speech, no collection for a goodbye gift. Christopher arrived early, probably hoping to avoid the awkwardness of public goodbyes, and spent the morning packing his personal items into cardboard boxes. I watched from my new office window. Yes, they'd given me an actual office with a view of the parking lot, as he made multiple trips to his car. Each box seemed heavier than the last, and his movements grew more hurried as the day progressed. By lunch, a small crowd had gathered near the windows, though no one mentioned what we were all witnessing. At exactly 5 o'clock, Christopher emerged from the building for the final time, carrying the last box and my coffee mug gift prominently displayed on top. He'd clearly found it and understood its significance. His face was a mask of controlled humiliation as he walked across the parking lot, past colleagues who pretended not to notice him leaving. His car door slammed with more force than necessary. The engine started with a rev that sounded angry and desperate. As he drove away, I realized I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, no vindication. Just a quiet sense that the natural order had been restored. Power built on undermining others was never sustainable. Christopher had spent 3 years believing his authority was permanent, that his position protected him from consequences. He'd forgotten that real power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. The parking lot grew quiet as the sun set behind the building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. But tonight, justice had been served with the simplicity it deserved. 6 weeks into my new role, I sat in what had once been Christopher's office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in organizational charts and policy drafts. The space felt different now, brighter somehow, with the heavy curtains replaced by sheer panels that let natural light flood across the room. I'd moved the desk away from the corner, positioning it to face the door so anyone who entered would see an open invitation rather than a defensive barrier. My first major initiative launched on a Tuesday morning with an email that generated more responses than any company announcement in recent memory. Introducing the Mentorship Bridge program, I'd written, connecting senior staff with junior employees across all departments, regardless of gender, race, or background. Within hours, 43 people had volunteered as mentors, and 67 had requested to be paired as ments. The bias training sessions started small with just department heads and managers, but word spread quickly about their effectiveness. Unlike the previous mandatory seminars that everyone endured with eye rolls and smartphone scrolling, these workshops used real scenarios from our own workplace. When I presented anonymized versions of the stories women had shared with me, the room fell silent. Some participants shifted uncomfortably. Others took notes furiously. "This happened here?" asked Tom from operations, staring at a case study about project credit theft that he didn't recognize as his own behavior from 2 years ago. "This happens everywhere," I replied quietly. "The question is what we choose to do about it." The anonymous feedback boxes I installed throughout the office filled up faster than I'd anticipated. Not just with complaints but with suggestions, praise for colleagues, and ideas for improvement. Reading through them each week, I discovered an undercurrent of creativity and innovation that had been suppressed for years. One suggestion particularly caught my attention. Could we create a space where people can work together informally? Somewhere that's not a conference room or someone's cubicle. It was signed simply, "A junior developer who has ideas." That weekend I found myself standing in front of the old coffee station, envisioning something entirely different. The space had always felt institutional. Metal counters, harsh fluorescent lighting, and chairs that encouraged quick visits rather than lingering conversations. I pulled out my phone and started sketching on a notes app. Monday morning I submitted a facilities request that raised a few eyebrows. Corner lounge renovation, think tank space. The proposal included comfortable seating, adjustable lighting, whiteboards, and yes, coffee, but coffee that served the space rather than defined it. A think tank. Uncle Dom asked when I showed him the plans during one of our weekly check-ins. "I like it. Reminds me of the early days when we'd gather around the drafting table and solve problems together." The renovation took 3 weeks. I watched from my office as contractors installed modular furniture, warm lighting, and a small plaque that simply read "Think Tank, Ideas Welcome." The coffee station remained, but it was integrated into a larger space designed for collaboration rather than service. The first time I saw an intern and a senior developer deep in conversation at one of the new tables, both of them sketching diagrams on napkins, I knew we'd gotten it right. Not everyone embraced the changes easily. David from sales, who'd sent that awkward congratulations email, tried to approach me one afternoon with what felt like a rehearsed apology. "Ashley, I wanted to say I'm sorry if I ever made you feel, undervalued. I hope we can move forward professionally." His words sounded hollow, calculated to protect his own position rather than acknowledge any real understanding of the harm he'd participated in. I accepted his apology with professional courtesy, but I didn't pretend it rebuilt trust that had never existed in the first place. Margaret from HR took a different approach. She appeared at my office door one evening as I was packing up, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. "I owe you a real apology," she said, sitting down without invitation. I laughed at that party. I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway because it felt safer than standing up. That's not who I want to be. Her honesty surprised me. We talked for nearly an hour about workplace dynamics, about the subtle pressures that make good people make bad choices, about how to build systems that support courage instead of punishing it. When she left, I felt something I hadn't expected, hope that people could genuinely change. 6 months after that awful office party, Uncle Dom announced his second retirement. This time it felt permanent. He'd stayed long enough to ensure the transition was solid, that the cultural changes were taking root, that the company could thrive without his direct oversight. "You don't need me anymore," he said during our final official meeting. "You never did really. You just needed the chance to show everyone else what I already knew." He left behind a company that felt fundamentally different. Not perfect, institutional change takes time, but moving in the right direction. Women spoke up in meetings. Junior staff shared ideas without fear. The think tank corner buzzed with cross-departmental collaboration that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. On quiet Friday afternoons, I sometimes found myself standing by the window where I'd watched Christopher leave, remembering the woman who used to serve coffee in silence. She'd believed that keeping her head down and working harder would eventually earn recognition. She'd thought dignity meant accepting disrespect without complaint. I understood her choices, but I no longer envied her silence. Speaking up had been terrifying. My voice had literally shaken during that first phone call to Uncle Dom. But that trembling voice had started something larger than personal vindication. It had created space for other voices to be heard. The coffee mug I'd given Christopher sat on my bookshelf now, a reminder not of revenge but of transformation. Not qualified had become more than qualified, not just for me but for every woman who'd been told she wasn't enough. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay small in a world that profits from your silence. Especially when you realize your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to find their own.